History does not repeat itself, but it often rhymes. And in today's video, I'm going to take the same approach and walk you through what the next 12 months of this market cycle might look like. Now, even though I'm going to be using historical data points to support my argument and explain you how we are leading into a crash, it will really be beneficial to the entire community if you left a comment letting me know your thoughts. Do you agree with this, or am I missing something really big? First, we're going to talk about how the market is showing signs of topping off. The next part, we're going to talk about the midterm correction. We are going to quickly go over the last 4 midterm years and understand where the weakness lies and why am I predicting a midterm correction in the next month or two. After that, we're going to talk about the next part, which is the recovery, and I am predicting that the market goes back to all-time highs in Q1 of 2027, which then leads to the next part, which will be a very difficult, choppy time frame where the distribution is coming in, and we'll just have to sit through that. And then that will lead us to the finale, which will be the crash of the AI bubble. And as promised, I'm not going to throw this bearishness at you. I'm going to back it up with some data points, some historical references that I've seen and observed. For example, the relation of ARK Invest ETF and SPY and the timeline at which they topped off in 2022-2021 timeframe. We are also going to go over Micron and understand the relationship it has with SPY and if that can be used to predict the market cycle top. And then I'm going to use the 2021-2022 playbook to see if we can overlap this with 2026 and predict the market cycle top. And lastly, if everything I predict turns out to be wrong, I do want to go over the dot-com bubble top and how it formed and how it differentiates from the 2021-2022 timeframe. So with that being said, let's get started with the first part, which was the market cycle that we're in right now. Where are we and why do I think we're topping off? For you to understand this divergence, it is very important to see the S&P 500 index next to the Nasdaq index and compare it side by side. What I just marked on the screen is the bottom that we formed in March 2026. Then we created the next higher low, and in this case scenario with Nasdaq, it will be right here. But notice the next higher low that we created on the S&P 500 was different than the Nasdaq one. Instead of a higher low, we created a lower high on the Nasdaq index. And if we look at the tops, the recent top that we saw on the S&P 500 index is at a new high, versus for Nasdaq, we did not break through the new high. And this is what's called divergence. And to explain it a little bit more, here's a Google definition. A divergence between S&P 500 and the Nasdaq occurs when one index rises or holds steady while the other one falls and lags significantly. The mismatch highlights sector rotation, changing risk appetite, or underlying market concentration. So all you need to understand here is that when a divergence happens in this manner, the ground underneath is shifting, something is changing. And if I had to choose more simpler words to explain this, what market is basically doing is that the S&P 500 wants to go higher and the Nasdaq is not ready to go higher. There is weakness within the index, and most likely Nasdaq will come down and then drag SPY with it. So that is the first indication that tells me that we are topping off right about here. And another reason that I think we might be topping off here is the same reason as to why I think there's a midterm correction coming. And that is because for the last 3 midterm years, we have seen weakness in the SPY and Nasdaq indices right around August and September timeframe. The only time it was a little different was in 2010, where we topped off and bottomed off a lot sooner than we are right now. And if we look at the 2026 timeframe, we are right on schedule. In my opinion, we are going to go sideways a little bit before we go into the midterm correction. And then right before the election is most likely when we will bottom off, and that will be about October, November timeframe. And of course, we can always go a different direction, but so far I have no evidence for that, because if I overlap 2014, we see the same pattern. We start the year with the weakness and then go to all-time highs and then go towards a correction. If I overlap with 2018, same thing. Year starts with some weakness, goes towards all-time highs, and then we go into the correction again. And then 2022, the same thing happened. The year started with weakness. It played out a little differently because it was a bear market year, but then eventually we did come down in September and then found the bottom in October. And then we went into a new all-time highs for Q1 of 2023. So I think that for now is enough evidence that we are topping off and we are headed towards a midterm correction. And the next part is very obvious. What happens after a correction? The market finally finds a bottom between 10, 15, 20% or so, and then we start to make our way back up. I don't think we're headed into a recession or a AI bubble collapse just yet. So most likely a correction will probably just last for 10, 15, or 20% and it will start recovering. And I predict that we go back to all-time highs for Q1. And the market only corrects in August and September timeframe just because of the uncertainty elections bring to the table. And once that is out of the way, there is no reason for the market to stay back down. So we head towards the all-time highs, and this is where things get very interesting. The reason I think we are going into a distribution phase is because I believe this is the last hurrah. We have accumulated enough debt in the system. The fundamentals is a whole nother picture, a whole nother video that I will have to go through. Today, I want to go over the cracks that I am seeing from the technical lens, how 2021-2022 cycle played out. And the first thing I want to go over is ARK Invest ETF. That was the poster child of the COVID bubble. And in my opinion, Micron and SanDisk are the poster child for this AI bull run. And let's go over that for a second. The thing with ARK Invest and Micron is that they suck all the liquidity out of the market. They outrun everybody else, and they are the first casualties. Now, I don't know if people remember or if they've studied the fact that the ARK Invest ETF topped off in early 2021 versus the market top for SPY and NASDAQ came way later, and to be specific, about 11 months later. As ARK Invest topped off and started to make its way back down, SPY started to recover and broke all-time highs again, and we climbed another 20% from February 2021 and finally topped off in January 2022 and started a bear market. Another thing to observe here is that ARK Invest was already down 40% in those 11 months before SPY started to crack and come down. So the question I want to ask is that if Micron, SanDisk, Seagate, and companies like this are the poster child of this AI bubble, then can we time and figure out where the market cycle top might be? So let's look at where Micron is. Assuming that Micron topped off in June 2026 at around 1255 price point, we give it 11 more months and we're sitting in May 2027. Now, I know that I said that I'm expecting a market cycle top around September timeframe. I was being a little bit more careful. I was stretching it out a little further out because I wanted to align it with the weaker months of the year, which are around August, September timeframe. So using 2022 and using the ARK ETF example, we can predict that maybe in 11 months, the market start topping off. And in case you don't believe that Micron, Seagate, SanDisk haven't topped off, I want you to take a good look at this chart because that is exactly how ARK Invest ETF popped. And that is exactly the pattern we're seeing on Micron. We are seeing that on WDC. We are seeing the same pattern in SanDisk, a euphoric top, a pullback, and a dead cat bounce. And we can go back to ARK Invest ETF and revisit that pattern. Same exact thing. We topped off on euphoria, went sideways for quite a long time, and finally popped and went all the way down. And lastly, this is the most important visual piece that I put together using Claude. And this is how the collapse played out in 2021 and 2022. First, all the SPACs, ARK Invest topped off in February 2021. Then we had the crypto mania that ended in April timeframe. They did print another top in November, but April is usually known as the official top for that market. But either way, it was after February. The next thing that collapsed was the Russell Index, and that was around November 2021. And then came the cyclical stocks like Nvidia and all the semiconductor ETFs. They pretty much collapsed at the same time as the index because obviously they're more of a mega cap stocks. So what happened here was a trickle down effect. The weakest stocks topped off first, and this is where things get interesting, and I wanted to mention this because Micron is not the only one that crashed. We can take an example of Oklo, which was the weakest one of them all, and then the SMR, also another hyped up nuclear play, and then came Micron. It wasn't the same time frame when they topped off. It is happening slowly. It's going from the weakest and it's coming for the strongest. So there's a pattern here, and I hope you observe it. If we go to the 2026 cycle that we're in right now, I already mentioned the weakness we saw in Oklo and SMR. These are the AI microcaps. They already topped off, and I'm assuming using the market cycle chart and example that MU and SanDisk and all these memory plays have also topped off, and they are in the process of going lower. The next is going to be the picks and shovels, which I'm expecting to be Avego, AMD, Marvel. I'm already seeing some weakness, but I don't know if they have topped off or not. I think maybe we get a little bit pullback in midterm correction, go back to new all-time highs, and then we finally top off. And then I think we're headed towards the generals, which are the mega caps, Nvidia, Microsoft, Google, Amazon, Meta, and the whole market comes down because the gambling and euphoria is done. Money is moving towards the stronger stocks, and eventually we'll run out of place to put it. And then finally, the NASDAQ and SPY index will officially come down. Originally, my plan was just to compare the 2026-2027 AI bull run to the 2021-2022 market cycle, but then I decided to do something very different. I decided to overlap it with the dot-com bubble, and something very crazy happened. What I noticed is that the pattern was similar, but still a little different because all the IPOs are the ones that topped off in 1999. These examples of Pets.com, Webvan, The Globe, eToys, they were all IPOs between 1998 and 1999. So they topped off way earlier than the market cycle, and the rest of the stocks topped off almost exactly the same month. So there was no slow death by 1,000 cuts. So the dot-com timeline got me really wondering as to how this time around might be a little different. Even though this is the path that I expect NASDAQ and SPY index to follow in the next 12 months, I still like to create theories and if-then scenarios if something does change. Now I'm going to be watching the data and charts very closely to see if I need to change my prediction here, but the only thing I can think of that might be different if we were to follow the same pattern as 2000 dot-com bubble is that if IPOs like ChatGPT and Anthropic start popping in middle of 2027 and we go into this euphoric mania and get a squeeze like we got in the dot-com bubble, maybe then in that scenario the IPOs top off first and then the rest of the market collapses in a few months. I don't know how that plays out, but for now this is the path that I think the market will take. And before you panic, there are ways to prepare for something like this. Keep your debt low. Reduce it if it's high right now. Don't sell your long-term accounts. In fact, be prepared to add on to those long-term accounts, because when a market pulls back, it's a feature. It's something that you should take advantage of instead of panicking. And lastly, be an architect of your life that no market cycle, no job market, no mortgage rate, nothing can affect it. You just live a good, happy life. Stay away from too much debt, and that is what causes most disturbances in everybody's life. So with that being said, I hope you found value in this video. Please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and I'll catch you on the next one. Thank you so much for watching.